us. Actually, you can't look at us because neither of us are streaming our webcams today. I'll spare you the details on that. Today, we are covering 7 mistakes to avoid when using electrical estimating software. Our live webinars usually focus on the tools, processes, and reports to use in electrical estimating software. Those are all aimed at making you a more knowledgeable and confident estimator. But sometimes you could take too many shortcuts or maybe forget things over time. So we have Brian Hoffelder here to keep us on our game. Just wanted to mention that you can chat off to the right. Just need to log in with a Google login or Gmail login, or I guess a YouTube login. And my name is Derek De La Quadri, and I am the president of Vision InfoSoft. And we have Brian Hoffelder here today. He's our estimating and training expert and is leading today's presentation. How's it going, Brian?
Good. Good morning, everybody. I think we're ready to jump into the webinar. So I'll take it from here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go through what I have found to be the real critical common mistakes that people make doing estimating over the years. The big number one is this is the most important one by far of all the other things we're going to talk about today is leaving items off the bid. If you leave something out, it's a hole that that you're leaving out. It's money out of your pocket. It's money out of your bid. So that's the biggest thing to avoid. Now, there's a few ways to avoid that. And the simplest thing is to mark everything off the prints, whether you're doing it manually as you mark it off the drawings and put it into your program or put it into a spreadsheet, however you're doing it, you have to mark it off the drawings. If you don't do that, you've opened up a big hole to miss things. So you want to mark off all the symbols, whether it's a receptacle, whether it's a light fixture. You want to mark off all the feeders and home runs. So you want to mark off, where you started the feeder from and where it ended up. Same thing with the home runs. You want to mark those off in the drawings. And the other thing you want to do, and maybe this sounds a little more detail oriented, is you want to mark off the notes that are on the drawings. Most pages have notes that apply to that particular page of the electrical takeoff. Highlight those. Again, whether you're doing it by hand with a highlighter or whether you're doing it electronically, all of the programs that do electronic takeoff have tools to highlight things. It's a real simple and easy thing to do as you go through the takeoff. So again, big thing, don't leave things out, and use the simple methods of marking things off as you go to avoid that. The other thing you can do to avoid missing things is to have a checklist of the major things in the job and just go through that on every job. Now, they may not all apply, but this is an example of a checklist. Most of your jobs will have fixtures. Make sure you didn't miss the page of the fixtures, the switch gear, the feeders. Those three are three of the biggies there. Your branch power. I've gone through a takeoff and taken off the devices and forgot to take off the wiring. Again, if you have a checklist, you can just go back through and check off the things that you've taken off. If there's mechanical on the job, make sure you took off the mechanical. Site work, that's kind of a big one. A lot of the time, the site drawings are separate. They might not even be part of the regular electrical packages. I've helped people with bids, and we've gone through the whole takeoff. And I had somebody, this was a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, that they'd taken off the whole job, and all of a sudden on bid date, they realized there was a whole site drawing that they hadn't taken off, and it was a lot more than what they'd put in the original estimate. So he had to hurry and get the site takeoff done. Low voltage, if there's any low voltage, it could be fire alarm, it could be datacom, it could be just any kind of low voltage wiring if that's part of your contract, or even if it's not something you're installing, at least you're getting putting in the backbone for it, the boxes and the conduit stubs and that kind of thing. Talked about fixtures, but again, there's lighting and lighting control. If there's a lighting control package, you want to make sure you've taken that off and got it included in your pricing. Talked about gear already. Branch wiring and devices. Make sure you've taken off all the branch devices. HVAC. I guess I got a little bit of repetition there. And then special systems. A couple of those are repetitions. I didn't realize that. So those are the main things to do. Mark things off as you go and have a checklist of all the major systems that are in your bid. So the second mistake, and I've seen this done, it's not hard to do, is to forget to put in the quote for your material. If you leave that quote out, obviously, you're you're leaving a big hole in your bid. So it's always one of the last things you want to check is to make sure that you've plugged in your lighting quote, your gear quote, if there's any other quoted material packages that you need to include in your bid. Now, Electrical Bid Manager will remind you. If you leave the quote out of the bid at the final report, it'll keep reminding you until you plug something in. So that's one of the advantages of using software is that there's going to be a built-in reminder not to forget the quote. The other thing related to that, which is a little bit different, is to make sure that you adjust your markup when the quoted material is owner furnished. Because if it would normally be a $100,000 lighting package and the owner's providing that, you need to adjust your markup because you're still doing the same amount of work. Whether you're putting, because you're still installing the fixtures. So you need to adjust your markup either by putting a bigger markup on your labor or a bigger markup on the overall job. There's a couple ways to do it, but you definitely need to compensate for the fact that you're not providing the appropriate or the related type of material. Because you're doing the same amount of work, so you've got to put a bigger markup in when the owner provides any of the lighting or gear packages. So don't forget to put your quote in, and don't forget to put more markup in if it's an owner furnished quoted material. Math mistakes are more difficult when you're doing it on a computer, but again, they still happen. I'll just give you a quick little example. This happened in a class a while back. Let me go back into EBM here. And this was in the final summary. I had a guy in a class, and it looked like he was kind of keeping up and everything was in good shape, except for when he went to non-productive. And when he plugged in the hourly rate here, he forgot the decimal point. Back there. Instead of 3105, he had 3105. And so his bid was just totally out of whack there, just by doing the one thing. So you got to be careful that the decimal point is in the right place. Let me go back to my.
Yeah, that's one of those simple things, right? That you think I would never do that because I would notice it. But when you're speeding through a bid, I could see missing a decimal point once in a while.
Yeah, when it happened in class, it took me a while to find it because I didn't know where he had done it. I had to really kind of dig through all of the
Yeah.
reports. It was hard to find, but it was just that one little thing had caused the problem. Now, the unit of measure is something, again, that you've got to watch out for, especially if you've gotten a quote on something and you put the wrong unit of measure or you went into the program and changed the unit of measure. Let me give you an example of that. This, again, happened on a training session I was doing just about a week ago. And the guy I was training I thought was pretty darn knowledgeable. And he just had a gut feel that his bid was off because he'd done those kind of jobs before, and it wasn't way off, but it was off far enough to make his bid higher than he thought it should be. Let's change this back to what it should be. Oops. So the problem was with the pull line he had in his bid. Let's see if I've got this with the mistake still in here. So I'm looking for my pull line. Right there. Yeah. Okay. So this is what he had in his bid. Instead of $28.42 for 1,000 feet, he'd accidentally changed it to per each. Now, you could catch it here in the spreadsheet, but it could go unnoticed fairly easily. The best way to catch that, I think I've got a slide coming up on this. Let me go back for a second to the slideshow. I'll come back and show you that report in a minute, because there's actually a report in EBM that'll help you catch those kind of things. Manual input is something that's hard to avoid again too. If you input 1,000 feet and it should have been 10,000, or vice versa, you put in 10,000 and it should have been 1,000. Those mistakes are probably the hardest to catch. Now, there's a report that'll help you catch both of those kind of mistakes: the wrong unit of measure or just the wrong total amount of material. In EBM, it's called the item cost report. I try to show this to everybody, and especially when we do the advanced class, but okay, so over here in reports under EBM, there's what's called the item cost report. And you tell it to sort by price. Give it a couple seconds here. So that item I was just mentioning, the pull line, that would have popped out on the item cost report because it'd be right up at the beginning. It would also catch things again if you had 12,000 feet of 3/0 wire and you just, that instead of 1,200 feet of wire, it would tend to pull those kind of mistakes up to the top of the report, because what it's sorting by is the extended price. So anything at the top of this list really should be critical items. And obviously 1/8-inch pull line doesn't belong there because it's just kind of a small dollar item on the bid. So when you go back and fix it, there's my 3/16 is okay. My 1/8-inch pull line is right here. Just change the unit of measure back to M. Hit save. And then we can go back to the item cost report. And now it's not at the top of the list anymore. So that's a really helpful report to finding mistakes. It won't catch everything, obviously. If you put in the too low a number, it's not going to help you catch it. But if the unit of measure is wrong, or the mistake you made was putting in 10,000 feet instead of 1,000, it might pull some critical items up to the top. So that's the item cost report. Some of the check figures that are in the program, and again, you can calculate these manually if you don't have a program like EBM, are the cost per foot. Now, there's 3 types of cost per foot that I would look at. And again, I'm going to switch back to EBM for a second. So down here in the bottom left, we've already put the square footage in. And over to the right here, you have what we call prime cost per foot and total cost per foot, the $13 and the $16. Now, again, if you're going to look at that number as a check figure, you want to compare to similar jobs. Whoops, sorry about that. So these numbers out of context may not mean anything. So it's really important that you keep track of your jobs so that when you're looking at the cost per foot, you're comparing to jobs that you've done, not some national average or more importantly, a different type of job. The other numbers that I think are even more helpful are the labor cost per foot. You see on this job, it's $391, because that takes out the whole material factor part of it. Again, if the job had owner furnished lighting or owner furnished switchgear, the labor cost per foot's not going to change. So if you compare this job to another job, whether or not the material was furnished by the owner, that cost will remain constant, or it should be similar. And then one more step here is to look at the labor hours per square foot, because everything we looked at in the cost per foot up to this point, though, is going to be affected by just ongoing price increases of labor and material. The labor hours per foot is a pretty clean number. Hours are hours. That doesn't have anything to do with whether it costs us $20 an hour or $200 an hour for the labor. So that's a really good benchmark. Again, you still want to compare similar jobs. Otherwise, if you're comparing a warehouse to a medical office building, that's obviously comparing apples and oranges. Again, a couple of the check figures to look at. Just look at the total number of hours. Does it feel right? I mean, part of this is experience and just knowing that certain types of jobs are going to be in a certain range. But also look at the number of days it's going to take to complete it. You know, if the program says it's going to take 1,200 hours and you've got two guys, that's going to be 60 hours. That's going to be, 600 hours each. That's going to be, uh, let's just look at it on the screen here. It's easier than me trying to do the math in my head. So it tells you on the EBM screen the number of days it would take based on your crew split. So if you've got two guys on this particular example, it would take 73 hours. That's basically 2 months. So is that reasonable? You know, is that a reasonable number of days to get the job done? You know, if you're thinking that you've got 2 weeks to do it and and that two guys should be able to get it done in 2 weeks, then obviously there's something wrong with the bid, and vice versa at the other end. But just look at the typical crew size and the number of days that it's going to take to complete the job. Is that something reasonable? And if it's not, if it's just something that doesn't look right, then you need to go back to your bid and see if you've made any mistakes, like we talked about earlier. Maybe you missed part of the takeoff. Maybe you input the wrong number for a, a feeder. Maybe you took off the wrong size of wire, or all those kind of things would come into play. So labor is really a good foundation of to check when you're trying to avoid mistakes, because labor is really important here. So branch wiring, again, a check figure would be to look at the amount of branch wiring, and you should figure probably that your average job will have 20 feet of branch wiring per device and fixture. So you can go back and count up all your receptacles and switches and fixtures. And then you want to see if your total amount of branch wiring, whether you do it in MC cable or whether you do it in conduit, it's typically going to be plus or minus 20 feet per device. If it's way off of that range, again, then you want to go back and look to see if there's a valid reason for it or if it was just a mistake. So that's one of the check figures you can use. Another mistake, and I think we've all been guilty of this, is just an oversight in the specifications. It could be something simple like they're requiring compression steel fittings instead of set screw steel. It could be that the job has, this is the big one I always look for, is if we can use MC cable in the branch wiring versus conduit. That's going to be a big cost difference. But you need to look at the grade of your devices. Are they commercial standard grade? Are they premium grade? Are they hospital grade? I just helped a customer with a job a couple days ago who was taken off a job had mostly hospital grade devices. And not only did they have hospital grade devices, but they had tamper proof, and a lot of them were USB hospital grade devices, receptacles. I mean, those are expensive. So you need to make sure that you check your specifications and make sure you've done it correctly. Again, a lot of that is experience. You'll know certain types of jobs are going to have different specifications, but you've got to go through the specs and look for those kind of things. So again, look for the wiring method, look for any other specific material requirements. You know, sometimes they want heavy duty fusible switches, sometimes instead of general duty. Sometimes they want NEMA 12 device fusible switches. All those kind of things are important in the final shakeout of your bid. The next one is bid qualifications. Especially today, we know that material pricing is an ongoing challenge with prices going mostly up, although we've seen some sliding down of prices. But you want to be careful to get a guarantee on the length, or first of all, give your customer a guarantee on the length of time that your pricing is good. Used to be 30 days was kind of a standard, but maybe now you need to lower that to a week or that kind of thing. And then when you get a quote from your supplier, how long are their prices good? You know, sometimes they're going to say that price on that wire is only good today. Well, you need to take that into account when you're qualifying your bid to your customer. You know, you can't give your customer any better of a time guarantee than your suppliers are giving you, and they just have to understand that. Or you got to build in some cushion to compensate for that. And finally, this is kind of what started my whole idea to do this webinar, is just not to be complacent, not to be naive. If your gut feel is that there's something wrong with your estimate, like that one I was telling you about with the customer a couple weeks ago, don't just take the number that comes out of the computer. Don't go in with the blinders on and say, "Oh, the computer says it's $150,000." Don't just take that number at face value without going back and really going through your checking process. Check to make sure you've got all your major systems in there. Check to make sure you haven't made any major math mistakes, that the unit of measure is correct on anything you've input. You haven't left out quotes, all those kind of things. This is really kind of the summary of it. And again, I kind of worry about it because I've trained so many people over the years. And it's really easy to get to the point where you just take the number that comes out of the computer without analyzing it and without checking it. So that's the biggest thing. I kind of goes back to the beginning and say, just don't take the numbers at face value without doing a thorough check and using your experience to validate that. So I think that's about it, Derek. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, 60 wire popped one over.
Okay. I don't see it in my window, so you want to tell me what it was?
Yeah, what is the best practice for open ceiling installation? Unistrut, threaded rod, beam, clamps, support hangers.
Doesn't seem to be related to this webinar, but again, I couldn't answer that just blanketly. You'd have to base it on the type of building it was and what kind of options you have based on the specs. Um, I don't think I can give you a quick answer to that without looking
Right.
at a specific job.
And then he said he had a follow-up that just said default job extension. I can't change to 25 plus. I'm not sure what he means by that.
The default job extension, let me go back to that screen here. So I think he means either the factor for the price or the factor for the labor. First of all, once you put a factor in here, let's say you want to bump your material price up and your labor 25. If you check this box to save it, it'll save it through this job. Every time you come back, it'll add it. Another option is to create what we call a template job and have a job that already has that factor built in. And so that when you start a job where you want to use that template or that particular setup, instead of creating a new job, you just copy your template. And that could apply to a lot of things. It could apply to the labor rates. It could apply to the way you want to break out the job. You can have templates on job setup. There's nothing in the takeoff. You just have set it up the way you want to do a particular type of job. Maybe it's industrial work where you want the 25% factor on the material and labor. You can just set up a job without actually having the takeoff. And then when you create a new job, you copy the template rather than just create a regular new job.
All
Any
right.
other questions?
In his response to the any best practice or standards or whatever for the ceiling install is just any standard. I think he's looking for a little guidance there if we could offer it, but I think it is probably outside of this webinar.
Well, typically for overhead, if I'm doing home runs for my branch, I'm going to use a beam clamp with a conduit hanger for most of it for the support. If it's a feeder, then you really got to look at some other options. You can do trapeze hangers. You can do uh, conduit hangers with threaded rod. Those are more expensive than just a beam clamp. But depending on the type of ceiling it is, you may or may not have that option. So I guess the only recommendation I would give is if you're doing branch circuits and they're going to be overhead, I would use a beam clamp with the conduit hanger. That's a pretty good item that'll cover most of your conduit support for your branch home runs.
Keeps the cost low.
It actually builds a little more in than just using a basic strap, but that's something you need to have covered because most of your home runs will be overhead. You're not going to just strap them to a wall or strap them to a ceiling or that kind of a thing. Um, so anytime you're running overhead, there are some important considerations to make as far as what kind of support to use. And it's more important when you get to the feeders, the larger stuff, than it is with the branch wiring.
And is there a standard for non-productive labor?
Oh boy, I don't think so. I have seen a lot of different approaches to that. It seems like every estimator has a little bit of their own spin on that. Let me just go show you a couple of options there. Some people just put a percentage down here. They'll say add 10%, 15%. In theory, your labor units cover your normal non-productive labor. You really are trying to compensate here for things that are over and above normal. So if you've got a job that's going to require more material handling than normal, then you want to put some time in that for that. A good example would be if your material is stored off-site or you got a multi-story building, you're going to have more material handling just to get things up and down the floors. So the answer to that question is no. I don't think there's a standard. Although most estimators, based on their experience, will know how much to adjust for particular types of jobs. Um, I think our column 2 labor, our standard column, again, includes most of the standard non-productive labor. Your normal labor hours without non-productive labor include normal setup, normal layout, normal coordination, normal breaks, and that kind of thing. You would only add things here if you think the job has at least a little bit more than a normal amount of non-productive. Uh, you need to put more than the standard non-productive allowances. Again, the bigger the job, you might have more site meetings, you might have more issues with scheduling. It really depends on the size and the type of job and the kind of way your company's organized. If you have project managers and they're uh, part of your overhead, then they're not part of your non-productive. If you got a project manager and his time is going to be allocated to the job, then the project manager is part of your non-productive labor. Anybody not working with the tools would be part of the non-productive.
All right.
Let's see, let me go back to the slides. I think there's one more slide that we have. Yep. So there's our contact information. You can always go to our website, email us at sales@vision-InfoSoft, or that 800 number will get you to either a sales rep or a support person or just any kind of administrative help that you need with our programs.
Yeah, if you have any questions about our program, sales, or you want to order, sales is good at visioninfosoft.com. And then it's not on this screen, but if you are a current customer and need a support case created because you have more questions, just go to our website /support or visioninfosoft.com and find the support button at the top on the navigation. But thank you, 60 Wire, for all the feedback today. And I'll be getting the item 3078 and that luminary cable to our, I guess our support development team and our Epic data team. And Brian, thanks for joining us today. And thank you everyone else who is here and didn't have any questions. We're always happy to answer your questions during these sessions. So don't be afraid. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.